I wanted to give you a small personal view maybe on what we experienced within the last 7-8 months, but then I think it's also what most other microbiologists could have presented here. So just let me introduce shortly what I'm talking about when I refer to our laboratory. It's not such a small laboratory. Let's call it a mid-sized laboratory with about 300 employees. We are fortunate that we have quite a good number of physicians of laboratory medicine or microbiology. And we are happy to be supported by around 160 medical technical assistants. And we are not a corona laboratory, but we are actually performing many analyses in laboratory medicine and microbiology. And I think it's important to emphasize that doing only corona might actually tire everybody a little bit. And you see that we serve much more to outpatients than to inpatients. So most of our testing, the samples are from outpatients, and we serve the greater Berlin area, which is not that small, maybe. And actually, when the virus popped up, we were remembering the last pandemic, because we had already a pandemic, and where we learned quite a lot of important strategies. And the swine flu pandemic, although the virus is completely different from SARS-CoV-2, it taught us that we have to be really good or well-informed, and that we also have to keep our staff updated. So we very early on organized meetings and informed everybody about the new virus, about what we are planning to do, and involved also the people working here in decision. And we also knew just from the beginning that it would be expensive. So we had to think that we had to buy new platforms, machines, also invest in staff. And so it was early on already. We knew that we have to allocate funds to pay all that off. And what we also learned with the swine flu pandemic, that you better start early to establish assays, and it's important to keep in mind that one assay will not be enough. So we actually at the end of January, beginning of February, started looking into the assays. And what's necessary sometimes is that you expand your platforms, and you have to keep in mind that the nucleic acid extraction should also be in part of that plan, because you might have wonderful cyclers, but if you can't do nucleic acid extraction in the numbers necessary, there will be a stop of the laboratory work. And what we also established quite early was a very small committee who on a weekly basis try to discuss what's missing, and and we sat together and looked into what's missing or where we should actually improve, and made the plan mainly for the following week, because we couldn't plan very much into the future. And as I already mentioned, we established a variety of assays, because it was you could think that there will be a shortness of supplies by at least some of the larger companies. And so that's depicted here. You see that with our platforms, we had already at the end of February one PCR assay established, and within 4 more months, by now we have 5 established, and actually looking right now into the 6th and the 7th assay, and we will probably continue like this unless the virus suddenly disappears. And This shows you here our data, and the positives are depicted in black, while the negatives are depicted in gray. And what you can see here is that within the summer weeks, the positive rate was pretty low, and it started to rise a little bit at the end of summer, where the returning travelers, and then got to go back once again. And then the virus was circulating in the younger population, actually, the people who didn't want to continue with.
We can't see the slides. Herr Ignatius, gucken Sie mal, irgendwie ist das, Sie müssen den Bildschirm noch freigeben.
I'm so sorry.
It doesn't matter. Oh. Okay, now it's good.
Okay.
Alles klar. Good.
This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the laboratory 28, and I mentioned everything which is depicted on that slide, and then we this is the time and a panel of establishing the assays, and this is okay. Yeah, now you see the positives and the negatives. Sorry, and what you can see that is that around week 30, 32, the numbers were increasing a little bit, and mainly by returning travelers, and then the virus was more circulating in the party population for younger adults. And right now we actually do see, you see week 38, for example, a larger percentage of positives, and these might be more due to family celebrations. So I hope you can see that slide, and it shows you that we compared to ELISAs for the detection of IgG antibodies, SARS coronavirus 2 specific antibodies, and actually we observed a high positive and negative agreement. So the two assays, although detecting antibodies specific for two different antigens, the S antigen by the diazorin assay and the nuclear capsid protein antigen by the Roche assay, they behave very similar in our hands at least. And if we then look at the results of when we started from early May until now, you see that the number of testing dropped dramatically. You see that we always have some positives, but actually what we were thinking at the beginning, that we might be able to diagnose also acute or recent infection by seroconversion, because we knew that some of the PCR results would be false negatives. Actually, it didn't turn out to happen. So it's only about 0.05% of all these testings detected an acute or recent infection. And before I get to the end of my presentation, some peculiarities of what at least to us as medical microbiologists seem to be a little bit bizarre within this whole situation, and that we had a public discussion of experts, so-called experts, one would have to say, and non-experts, and of every talking around today is mixed by experts and non-experts. Though the experts are mainly virologists, who might look at the whole pandemic more from a scientific view, and non-experts, well, most of the politicians I would call non-experts in regarding the value of diagnostics and what has to be considered. And so we had a interesting discussion on what gene targets must be detected within the PCR, which I don't remember that we had something before with norovirus or influenza virus, but suddenly everybody was talking that there must be two, and must be a dual target, a PCR, a single target is not enough. And we had an interesting discussion also about the test parameters. And I was surprised when health officials were saying that we need 100% specificity of the assays, because I thought better to have 100% sensitivity of the assays to actually detect every single case. And we all know that you can't have 100% in both of these characteristics. So if you try to increase specificity, you will lose sensitivity and vice versa. And we also have patients who call us and ask for the positive predictive value right now of the assays that we perform. And so we are surprised that suddenly everybody knows what's a positive predictive value. It was interesting to see that the ideas which population should be tested differed quite considerably, and some people thought that, or some politicians thought that everybody should be tested. And Michael Muller already mentioned the Bavarian testing strategy. And we have an ongoing discussions which materials might be suitable for testing. So saliva is, in some studies, it seems to be as good as the swab. In some other studies, it doesn't seem to be as good as the swab, although I think that right now many studies are being published that are not solid in what they in their conclusions. And stool is another one of these materials. And Michael Muller already mentioned the CT value. So it's the cycle threshold, which means that if you got a high cycle threshold, the PCR needed many cycles to actually get to a positive result. And if you've got a low CT value, there's lots of virus in there. And so the PCR needs less cycles. And right now, for example, the Robert Koch says that if your PCR has a CT value larger than 30, the patient probably is not transmitting virus to the relatives and family. And I just had on Sunday I had to call one patient who was severely sick, and I couldn't actually contact his physician. So I contacted him personally, and had CT values of 36, which is pretty high. But he was severely sick, and so he had chills and fever, and although not coughing, 800 EBU didn't didn't solve the problem. And so I think the CT values is pretty much overestimated as being helpful in the whole discussion. And we shouldn't forget that the PCR is a qualitative test and not a quantitative test. And then the non-adherence to the national testing strategy was quite interesting to see. Also, politicians developed their own ideas. And in this discussion, actually, I would have appreciated if maybe the Robert Koch were a little bit more present and actually trying to reduce that a little bit and focus everybody on this national testing strategy, which is really important to come well through this pandemic. We have domination of this public discussions by non-epidemiologists, unfortunately, I must say. And again, maybe the call to Tim to be more present maybe in this public discussions. And I must say, we as for example, microbiologists, we were not very present in these discussions. And we might actually, with all what we know from about testing and these test specificities, for example, we should actually bring us maybe more into these discussions. What we do see, which is a little bit sad, that is that there is a stigmatization of patients, and which reminds us what happened at the beginning of the HIV pandemic. Today, for example, if a patient gets a positive test result, everybody says, "Oh, he didn't adhere to these recommendations, so he didn't maintain the physical distance, and he's guilty, and he might actually bring this virus now into other patients." And it's a little sad that we actually do see something like this happening again right now. And last but not least, I think we always should keep in mind that we have responsible citizens here in Germany, and actually grandparents, for example, should decide by their own whether they want to see their grandchildren or not, and whether they think that it's a tremendous danger to see their grandchildren. And I think that the public discussion is a little bit too much sometimes in paternalism and saying, no, you shouldn't do this right now. And we should, this is what Leah mentioned before, we should actually try to involve the whole population into our discussions, and also to find to try to increase the trust into our decisions and make everything maybe a little bit more transparent. And with that, I get to my summary conclusions. I think it's important to organize a small steering committee for these rapid decisions early on. Then it's always important to have a variety of tests, and you should actually react if it should be able to react on regarding problems. And problems doesn't mean only staff or machines, but also reagents. And what's really important is that you have to stay in close contact with referring physicians. We always report positive tests, for example, by calling the physicians. And yes, this is what we microbiologists have to keep in mind, that we try to be heard and maybe a little bit better as specialists and care providers. And last but not least, after the pandemic is before the pandemic, there will be other viruses coming out of bats and other animals. And these resilient structures that we have established must be reinforced to be able to react then. Once again, thank you very much. And with that, at the end, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.